Stranger Things is packed with pop culture references. For Season 4, the Duffer brothers also drew inspiration from some real-life horror stories. Find out how the best nod to A Nightmare on Elm Street was created just hours before shooting. Discover the origins of the Hellfire Club and its connection to Eleven's story. And learn which of Stephen King's novels was behind that heart-stopping roller rink scene. Let's take a look at the most intriguing Easter eggs in the latest season of Stranger Things. A Nightmare on Elm Street. Season 4 is arguably more horror-oriented than the previous seasons. The most obvious inspirations were drawn from the iconic slasher of the 80s and its star, Freddie Krueger. The Duffers aren't even trying to hide all these references. Vecna's burned, corpse-like look is definitely reminiscent of the Nightmare Killer. Just like Freddy, the Stranger Things new Big Bad invades the dreams of teens and uses their fears to kill them in real life. There's even a direct Freddy Krueger boiler room joke.
Like Freddy Krueger's boiler room.
Freddy Krueger?
Dustin also comments on how Vecna's red smoke mental lair is comparable to the dream world from the horror movie. And Robert Englund, who famously played Freddy in the Nightmare on Elm Street films, portrays a mysterious asylum patient named Victor Creel. Hilariously, Robin doesn't see any similarities, although in the family video shop where she works, there's a cardboard cutout for the second movie of the franchise, Freddy's Revenge. But there's also a more subtle reference to the 80s slasher. Stranger Things executive producer Sean Levy revealed that one particular moment was totally his idea. It turns out that the night before the shoot, he rewatched Nightmare on Elm Street. The next morning, he came to work and said, "Let's take some kind of tool and grind the top of the table in Victor Creel's cell." That's how we got that introduction shot of Victor's fingers scratching the wood, as a little extra nod to Freddy. And there are many more other cool references to iconic movies and villains. Sweet nostalgia. Season 4 is not always jump scary. It also carries the feeling of a slow burn dread. Sean Levy revealed that he borrowed that style of suspense from classics like Silence of the Lambs and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The sanitarium where Victor Creel is housed is very much like the one from the latter. Levy shared that he had lots of fun casting the background patients in their white outfits and haunted faces. And as if that wasn't enough, Pennhurst Mental Hospital has a real-life counterpart. We'll tell you more about it later. But now let's talk about less creepy Easter eggs. When Eddie Munson points out the school caste system in a rant in the cafeteria, he mentions the jocks, the freaks, the nerds, the popular kids, and the criminals. This is a nod to the character breakdowns from the iconic coming-of-age film, The Breakfast Club. Susie's big sister Eden is actually styled to look just like the actress Ali Sheedy from the same movie. And speaking about the Stranger Things tech genius, the scene where Susie hacks into the Hawkins High School computer is a reference to Matthew Broderick changing his grades in War Games. And that's not the only reference to this classic movie. When Mike and Will call Nina, they realize they're connecting with the computer. That's because they recognize the sound it makes as being the same sound from the cyber thriller. At one point, Mike outright comments about how similar Nina is to Joshua, the powerful computer from the movie. There's also a fun Easter egg hidden amongst all the horror. Skull Rock, where Eddie Munson hides, is the name of a location in the Disney animated classic Peter Pan. It even looks the same. And just like in previous seasons, there's a Ghostbusters Easter egg too. Dustin has a pin on his backpack that says, "I've been slimed." So, what other movies are mentioned in Season 4? Jonathan notes that Police Academy 3 is currently playing in theaters, while Nancy has a Tom Cruise poster on her wall. And that's probably because the events take place right around the same time that his breakout hit Top Gun came out. But most of the references come from Steve and Robin's new gig, a video rental store. It's full of movie posters and promotional items. We see posters for Weird Science and Teen Wolf. The one for The Last Dragon even serves as a backdrop to Steve and Robin's conversation about their romantic woes in Chapter 2. There are also era-appropriate cardboard cutouts all over the store, including those for Gremlins and Raiders of the Lost Ark. By the way, when Joyce and Murray land their single-engine plane that they don't know how to fly, it's definitely a nod to another movie of the franchise, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. The Star Wars original trilogy fans also recognized a famous phrase, "Never tell me the odds." While playing D&D in Chapter 1, Dustin directly quotes Han Solo from The Empire Strikes Back. Aside from Star Wars, the biggest nerd property on the planet is The Lord of the Rings. So it's not surprising that Stranger Things paid homage to it too. Eddie compared the mission to stop Vecna to stepping into Mordor to stop Sauron, a reference that poor Steve totally didn't get. Tisk tisk, Stevie. Well, that's not surprising at all, as the Lord of the Rings movies came out 15 years later. Let's see what else Steve had no idea about. The dangers of Hellfire Club. Dungeons & Dragons influenced the storytelling this season even more than ever. For starters, the kids call the new tentacled villain after a D&D monster, and the plot also plays out like a story from a role-playing game. When the gang goes into the Upside Down after Steve, it's like a search party embarking on a fantasy quest to defeat a powerful supernatural being. Eddie Munson probably borrowed the name for his D&D club from the pages of Uncanny X-Men comics. In the 80s, they introduced the Hellfire Club as mutant antagonists. We'll talk more about them soon. But now let's dive deeper into musical Easter eggs on Stranger Things. First off, Eddie himself looks a lot like a rocker. His metal band members wear Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden t-shirts. We also see a banner with the logo for the legendary Motorhead hanging in their garage studio. But one of the best moments is when Eddie compliments Steve on taking down the demo bats, calling him metal. Steve doesn't have a clue what Eddie's talking about. Obviously, he's never heard of the infamous Ozzy Osbourne moment where the rock star bit the head off a bat on stage. His passion for metal music and D&D caused Eddie many unpleasant moments. As wild as that sounds, there was a real satanic panic that developed around the Dungeons & Dragons game in the mid-80s. The head of the Hellfire Club didn't think it was dangerous though, and he cited an article about it in Chapter 1. However, after a series of brutal murders, Hawkins residents were ready to point pitchforks at anyone who played the game. Eddie may be a fictional character, but his storyline is based on very real kids who suffered that exact persecution. The West Memphis Three were 3 teenagers who were convicted for heinous crimes they did not commit. Sadly, to many Americans, they were pawns of the devil just because they loved the wrong music and read the wrong books. We'll get into some geeky and nerdy Easter eggs in a few seconds, but right now, you're welcome to check this out. Visit our awesome merch shop. We have branded t-shirts, hoodies, eco bags, and even phone cases. You can choose between dozens of unique and awesome designs. Click the link under the video and find your perfect match. X-Men references. The very first chapter of Stranger Things saw Will and Dustin race for a copy of Uncanny X-Men number 134. In Chapter 3 of the first season, Dustin suggested that Eleven could be a mutant, like the X-Men. In the third season, Hawkins Mall felt like a reference to the stories that introduced Jubilee, and Dustin called his radio transmitter Cerebro, aka Professor X's psychic power device. Season 4 has brought another nod to the gadget. The top-secret machine Elle is put inside to regain her powers is also reminiscent of Cerebro in its look and function. Moreover, the horrifying Vecna operates similarly to the leader of the X-Men. A powerful telepath, Professor X could reach any person in the world. Vecna does the same, venturing into the minds of the most vulnerable teens. As we have mentioned before, the Hellfire Club is a reference to the X-Men comics too. A villainous group of the same name played a significant role in the Dark Phoenix arc, and Eleven's backstory, revealed in Season 4, actually mirrors it to a degree. In the graphic novel, Jean Grey was possessed by a cosmic force, the Phoenix, and was granted godlike powers. Unfortunately, she soon found herself manipulated by a psychic named Mastermind. He tricked Jean into betraying the X-Men. Eventually, she broke free from Mastermind's control and took her revenge upon the psychic. Doesn't that sound familiar? Still, the Dark Phoenix isn't the only character Eleven is based on. Straight from the King of Horror. There would be no Elle without Charlie, the telekinetic heroine of the Stephen King novel Firestarter. It premiered in the mid-80s, and we dare say that its soundtrack influenced that memorable synthy Stranger Things score. The Firestarter's Charlie was born as the result of an experiment. She is chased by a nefarious government organization who are eager to harness her powers. And Season 4 brought us yet another moment inspired by King's creation. At the beginning of the season, Eleven is struggling to fit in at her school in California. Things get worse when the local queen bee Angela starts to relentlessly bully Elle. The storyline clearly reminds viewers of the novel and its movie adaptation, Carrie. Its protagonist, who has telekinetic powers, was viciously abused by her classmates. We won't spoil the story for you in case you haven't seen it. But the sequence at the roller rink where Eleven is sloshed with a milkshake has lots in common with the prom scene in Stephen King's book. Just like Carrie, Elle gets her revenge, although she couldn't strike back with her powers as she no longer has them. Now it's time to tell you about the exciting references in the Stranger Things locations. Real-life haunted house. Surprisingly, our favorite sci-fi series has been inspired by true stories. You might have watched the series of movies about the Amityville haunting. The story was first told in the 70s in a book called The Amityville Horror, a True Story, and soon adapted into a film. It told the story of the Lutz family, who relocated to Long Island for a fresh start. However, 1 month later, they were forced to flee because of the paranormal activity in the house. It turned out that, a year earlier, the owners of the house were killed by a family member. Clearly, the Duffer brothers were inspired by these events when crafting the story of the Creel house and the unlucky family who lived there. Another intriguing detail in the Stranger Things 4th season is the Pennhurst mental hospital, where Victor Creel was doomed to spend the rest of his life. It's not strictly a real place, but there was a Pennhurst State School and Hospital in Pennsylvania, and the real Pennhurst has its own history to discover. Once seen as a model institution in the 80s, it was described as understaffed, dirty, and violent. It was actually shut down in 1987, 1 year after the events of Stranger Things Season 4 takes place. Let's wait and watch the second part of the season to learn if the hospital will also be closed by the end. If you liked this video, support OSSA by sending a super thanks. Just click on the thanks button under the video and choose an amount to donate. Stay awesome, and remember, we value each one of you. And check out our video on the Stranger Things cast's real-life partners. Stay awesome.